Taking the show on the road and setting up at the offices of the Attorney General of British Columbia, Bert is joined on the hot mic by Minister David Eby. An NDP MLA, he was re-elected to the legislature in 2017 following a more than noteworthy defeat in 2013 of then Premier Christy Clark by a margin of 785 votes in the riding of Vanouver-Point Grey, a riding previously held by fellow Liberal Premier Gordon Campbell. Eby previously worked with the Pivot Legal Society in the downtown Eastside, which he then followed as the executive director of the British Columbia Civil Liberties Association through 2012 before being elected into provincial politics. As the Attorney General of British Columbia, he recently worked to overhaul ICBC. He also oversaw the on-budget $57.1 million construction of a new centralized distribution center for liquor and cannabis. With the addition of the latter through national legalization, Bert speaks to the Attorney General about the challenges the province has faced with implementing a safe and efficient rollout of both licensed retailers and product to British Columbians, while also acknowledging the significant work that still needs to be done on both fronts. We go now to Bert, on location, in conversation.
Welcome to License to Chill. I've got a very special guest today, the BC Attorney General, David Eby. David, welcome to License to Chill.
Thanks for having me, Bert.
David, I got to admire you. I tell you, I take my hat off to you. I think about you just about every day, and I don't know how you do it. You're like an Energizer bunny on a car battery, and that you are so busy at your work. You've got a young family and a new addition to your family, plus you're also so involved with ICBC, Lottery Corporation, which is all the casinos. You got the files that are like playing whack-a-mole, liquor and cannabis, where there's always issues popping up. Plus you got the running of the criminal justice system for the province of British Columbia. I don't know how you find time to do all that, but I understand you also do yoga. How does all this work for you? Do you ever sleep?
There's lots going on, and no, I know with the new baby at home, I don't sleep anymore. We've got rid of that, so it frees up a lot of time in the evenings. She's 2 months old, so
wow.
Yeah, every 3 hours. But my wife is a rock star and is carrying a disproportionate load, and we're making it work. It's a lot of it is, it's challenging, it's interesting, and the time flies, and some of it doesn't even feel like work, and so I enjoy it.
So when you had the first meeting with the Premier after you formed government and he called you in to say, I'm going to appoint you Attorney General and I'm also going to give you all these other responsibilities, did you have that moment where you said, holy moly, how am I going to do all this?
I should have really had that moment. I remember when the Premier called and said, yeah, I'd like you to be Attorney General, and also, if you do liquor and ICBC as well as part of that, and BC Lottery Corporation, I thought to myself, well, those are, I was the critic on liquor, so I had an idea of some of the things that I was hoping we'd be able to do. When we were in opposition, and Attorney General, I thought would be the biggest part of the role around the justice system, and every time someone sees government and these sort of high-profile court cases, I really did not imagine that I'd be spending most of my time on car insurance and money laundering. So those were unexpectedly large portfolios added to some already very large portfolios. So it ended up being more than I think even any of us expected, including the Premier.
Is it fair to say that when you became the Attorney General on ICBC and on the casino file, you discovered these time bombs in your in basket? Is that fair to say?
Yeah, that's exactly what happened. So, before the election, there was no discussion about the fact that ICBC was going to lose $1 billion in the fiscal year. In fact, there was this concerted effort to hide it, booking savings from a report that hadn't been received, booking the sale of properties that hadn't been sold, booking the sale of the URL icbc.com, which hadn't been sold for $10 million, just to hide the fact that ICBC was losing so much money. So it wasn't an election issue, and so nobody really knew going into the election what was happening there. And then similarly on the casinos, the secret report that outlined large scale money laundering taking place in BC casinos that was done by a firm called M&P, provided the finance minister, had never been released. Certainly none of the details about BC acting as a hub for international money laundering had been discussed publicly by the Liberals, even though it was so notorious that when I first had my briefing with the regulator, they said, get ready, I think we're going to blow your mind, and outlined the whole thing for me. It was not a secret within government, but outside of government it was.
Wow. Well, it really caught a lot of media attention, my attention, because I still have a hard time imagining somebody showing up in a casino with a duffel bag full of $20 bills. And they got away with that for so long. And on the insurance side, I know I'm going to feel it when my car insurance comes up for renewal, but that is to try and get ICBC back on a stable financial footing.
So we've made a bunch of changes to how car insurance works in the province. So if you have a more minor injury, there's a limit on something called a pain and suffering award, and some other reforms that allowed us to do a couple things. One is save about $1 billion a year, and the other is increase other benefits like your out-of-pocket expenses, and for people who are catastrophically injured, increase their benefits as well that hadn't been increased for about 20 years. But rates are still too high, and there's a lot of room for us to do more on that, and so our work is continuing on that. One of the changes that we've made that is controversial right now is we've asked people who are higher risk drivers to pay more. That includes inexperienced drivers, and so disproportionately young people, as well as people who have multiple tickets, multiple at-fault collisions, because it costs a lot of money to insure these drivers. And inexperienced drivers are still pretty heavily subsidized, but we are asking them to pay more, especially on collision and third-party liability. So it gets like painful in a hurry when you start talking about car insurance, both because it doesn't, when you spend money on it, doesn't feel like you're getting anything for it until you're actually in a collision, and also because it's really technical and kind of boring.
Yeah. And I understand now, if I have my car insurance, when I renew my car insurance, I have to list, when I renew my insurance, who might be driving my car. So if I want to let an employee of my company borrow my car to go up to City Hall to a meeting or whatever, I have to declare who that person is when I renew my insurance.
Yeah, people who live in your house are your employees, and the reason for that is previously if you loaned your car out to the employee and that person had a crash in your car, that would go on your insurance record and not on the employee's record, and so that person would go off and have a clean driving record, and meanwhile yours would be affected by the insurance hit. And British Columbians told us that they wanted people's records to follow the driver, not the vehicle. That made a lot more sense to them, that people who had multiple collisions should be paying more, not the person who loaned out their car to someone who wasn't a great driver. And so that's what we've tried to do with the system.
Okay, so as an employer now, can I ask my employees and say, okay, Christina, Stephanie, whoever works for me, show me your driving record. I want to know what it is, because if you're a high-risk driver, I don't want you driving my car because I don't want you out there risking it.
Yeah, so when you go into your broker and you add on these drivers, they're going to be able to tell you, and obviously you're going to have to get consent from your employees, but if driving your vehicle is part of it, and they're going to tell you, look, this person, when I add them to your car, your insurance is going to go up pretty dramatically because they have a pretty terrible driving record, and then you're going to make the decision of the 3 employees who can drive in your firm. The 2 with the good driving records are the ones that are going to drive your car, and the one with the bad driving record isn't. And that's good news for British Columbians too, because you're making decisions that reduce the risk for everybody on the road when your car's being used out there.
Okay, and so for taxi cab drivers and eventually Uber and rideshare drivers, they'll have to go through the same, well, they must have to pay a lot of insurance.
So for rideshare, they're going to be on a per kilometer insurance product, as they are in other provinces across Canada. And the insurance kicks in when you accept a ride on the rideshare app up until the point that you drop the person off. So people pay their regular car insurance just as if they were driving as a civilian, not an employee or working for one of these companies. And then as soon as they turn on the app and accept a ride, then the additional insurance kicks in to cover them during the period that they're using their vehicle to earn money.
Okay, that makes sense to me. I'd like to switch topics now to cannabis. We're 1 year into legalization of cannabis. How has it gone from your perspective so far, being on the regulator side, in the government side? The 1 year experience with cannabis, is there things you would have done differently? What are your thoughts?
So I think we've been really successful at some things, and I think we've really been challenged by other things. So the things that we've been really successful in, British Columbia was unique in Canada in that we had an election within the period that a lot of other jurisdictions were standing up their systems for approving licenses and everything. And so we were taking over government at a time when other jurisdictions were well ahead of us. And so despite that, we had licenses out the door within 14 days of the legalization date. But with that said, we were starting well behind other provinces. And so we've been playing catch up this whole time. we've got 146 licenses now, but it took us a long time to get there. There were a bunch of people who paid, and there are still people who have paid for their application or waited for a long period for security and background checks, fit and proper especially. And so we recognize that, and we've made adjustments to the workflow to make it work better. And also, it's been a priority for the province as we transition, and we've always seen it as a transition from the illegal market to the legal market, that it wouldn't be, as of the day of legalization, all the old stores would close and all the new ones would be legal and lining up to pay their taxes and all these kinds of things, that there would be a transition. And so that's where we are in the transition, and it's we've dealt with, I think, a lot of the challenges we had around the backlog. The other piece is, and some of the frustration I have is that, and it's come with a decision that we made early on, which is municipalities have a huge say in whether or not there are licensed stores. So we have a very big municipality, Surrey, not accepting government stores. And it's, we respect their ability to do it. It's important that they be able to make those decisions. But at the same time, that means that the illegal market in Surrey continues and has a better foothold there than it would in other parts of the province. And so we continue to work with municipalities to have those conversations about how we can get to a legal market. And the other piece is enforcement is starting to ramp up. We have our community safety group that has been going around and introducing themselves to unlicensed vendors and saying, listen, you're going to need to be part of the legal process now. There's one other piece where I think we can do better and where there's an opportunity for us is BC has always been famous for cannabis. And it would be really sad if we lost that advantage because of the federal government's rules around licensed growing, which means that you have to be basically a big company, an incredibly well-financed operation in order to jump through all the bureaucratic hurdles that have been set out. So I think that in phase 2 for us, whenever that comes, being able to support smaller growers in British Columbia, farm gate sales, and having BC growers in a BC process selling through licensed stores is a really important thing, especially when you look at what's happened in liquor and that transition that was so beneficial to craft breweries, craft distilleries, wineries. The parallels are certainly there, but under the federal regime that we have right now, it's too bulky and bureaucratic and expensive for small producers to participate. And I don't think that if it was the intention, that's disappointing, but I don't actually think it was the intention. I think, just people made a list of rules and they're expensive to comply with.
I agree with you. I think it was an unintended consequence, but I would love to see a dialogue between government and the industry to try and get us back to having a boutique industry producing quality cannabis for not only our consumption here, but also for export across the country. With respect to the rolling out of cannabis, I must admit the biggest complaint we hear from people who have applied for a retail cannabis store license is the time delay. We have people who've been waiting for up to a year. Now, some of it is the fault of the applicants because they haven't provided all the information. And we have had situations where we've had an existing liquor licensee, well qualified, apply for a liquor license, where the application to the branch was about half an inch high. And then for that same person, same corporate structure, but because the requirements on cannabis is that cannabis application was 15 inches high. And because of the detailed analysis, I can understand why, but it just takes so long to get through the process. And of course, people have gone hard on the lease, they're paying rent. Some cases they've actually started building out the store, and then you've got to get through the municipal process. So anything you can do to reduce that, but yeah, I know your staff are terrific from my end, my perspective, and I think they're working hard, but it's just such a tough, difficult process to get through.
It is, and the multiplicity of agencies involved, the police, the Solicitor General's office, my office, through the regulator, has not made it easy. And so we have, I think we've doubled our licenses in the last couple months after we adjusted some workflow, and there were requirements that we had that we realized weren't necessary. There was an approval in principle, and then you'd have to get a second inspection afterwards, and these kinds of things that we've gotten rid of. And so it has eased some of that process. But I think one of the things that is a delicate balance that we're trying to get is you have to have licensed stores in order to achieve the goal of displacing the illegal market. And simultaneously, we didn't want the licensed stores to be operated by people involved with organized crime. So, we wanted to have detailed background checks, but those take time, which meant that we didn't have as many licensed stores as we wanted. So trying to balance those two priorities of ease and speed of application with ensuring that organized crime wasn't involved so that there could be a legitimate and licensed marketplace has been challenging. And I think we've turned the corner on it, but it did take much longer than any of us hoped for.
Yeah. The one thing we hear from people who've gone through your process, have a legal licensed store, and are legitimate, they're coming to us and saying, okay, I'm now legit. I've gone through the process. I have my retail cannabis store license. I've got local government approval. I've got a business license on my wall. When are they going to shut down the guy down the street who's still operating an illegal store? In some cases, those stores that are illegal have an online ordering system. And that's the one thing we hear about is the wanting to crack down on black markets. Indeed, I even hear of some stores on First Nations land where they have a drive-through cannabis store out near Enderby, and they've got signs for it, promoting drive-through cannabis store. And if we hear those sort of things, I think that's only going to increase as you get more and more approved, proper stores through the system.
Yeah, I think that's one of the pieces that has been in the period that we were taking such a long time to issue licenses. It was obviously challenging to go out and shut down all the stores without licenses because it was so difficult to get a license. But now that we're in a period where we've transitioned into there's 150 licenses across the province. There's 7 government stores. There's the online store. The Solicitor General's office is working with the community safety folks on that discussion of when do we start to actually shut down the illegal stores that are operating and not participating in a licensing process.
Yeah. Is there any discussion going on between the government with the municipalities that we call the red municipalities, like you mentioned Surrey or Richmond, to get them to going to green? We evaluate municipalities in terms of cannabis as either being green, like Vancouver, and the City of North Vancouver, District of North Vancouver, Port Coquitlam, where you can apply for a cannabis store in their municipalities. The yellow ones are places like Coquitlam where they're thinking of it, they're looking at it, they're trying to figure out how to roll it out. Yeah. And then the red ones are the hard nose. These are like Surrey's and Richmond. Is there any dialogue to try and get those going, looking at it because of the black market concern?
Well, I think when we look at Richmond's an interesting example because the distribution center for cannabis is in Richmond, and Richmond Council supported those jobs and that opportunity to be in their city. And so there's definitely room to have the conversation with cities, and we support their autonomy in being able to decide whether or not they want to be part of the legal market. And the message that I would have for any of those mayors and councillors is quite simple, that the demand doesn't disappear just because you don't have legal stores in your community. What it means is that someone else is fulfilling that demand, and it's through the illegal market. And that means, and typically it's not just cannabis, right? It's cannabis, it's cocaine, it's other harder drugs, and it's organized crime. So what comes with organized crime, we know: money laundering, violence, fighting over turf, all these terrible things. And so why this program was put in place by the federal government was to try to displace some of that. So it'll be interesting to see over time as the project rolls out and as these cities get a chance to visit other communities and see how the cannabis stores are working. If they're not working well, then maybe they'll say we made the right decision. Or if they look and they say, okay, these are well run, they're government regulated, they're not selling to kids, people know what the product is, they're getting good health advice about using it and minimizing harm, then we support that. And that's kind of what I hope, is that we're running it so well that these cities look at it and say this is a good direction for us to displace the organized crime element.
Yeah, and I think that's important because I know people, I've got friends that still do what I call the $100 on the barbecue, where then they'll put an envelope on the barbecue on a morning, and that night the $100 is gone off the patio, and there's a little bag there because the cannabis they've been getting for years from somebody in that industry works for them, whether it be an illness like Crohn's disease or something else. And the only way you get rid of that is if you have municipalities that are open to having retail cannabis stores. I want to switch gears now from cannabis to liquor. Free trade. and the wine sales in grocery stores, which is an interesting issue. I think the previous government created the most bizarre model by putting wine into some select grocery stores, BC Wine, and now under the North American New Free Trade Agreement, and which came about as a result of a challenge by the Obama administration of the wine and grocery store model of the previous Liberal government, came down and said import products have to go in. Is there any sense of what's going to happen with free trade? Will we be able to go into a grocery store and buy California wine or Chilean wine or Australian wine?
So it's my understanding. So a couple things happened. We had the trade challenge from the United States. We had challenges from Australia and the European Union. Just really clearly, the structure set up by the previous government not compliant with international trade rules, that we only sell BC wine in grocery stores. And all those jurisdictions recognize that grocery stores are a major channel for selling wine. And while they were able to tolerate BC only freestanding VQA stores as sort of promotion, and there are not too many, and it's not a priority, as soon as they went into the grocery stores, I think that was the end of the line for them. And so they brought these challenges. It became an issue in the NAFTA renegotiations. It became an issue in terms of formal challenges being launched. So we have changed the rules, and you are allowed to now sell in grocery stores international wine, as well as any Canadian wine that you want. Because it also violated domestic trade rules, and so that is in place right now. I understand that Loblaws is currently putting in place the infrastructure that they need to stock and sell international wines for their stores. And I don't know about other stores, Save On Foods and so on, what their plans are, but they are legally allowed to sell any wine that they want, or cider, sake, mead.
Yeah, but can they voluntarily or just choose just to restrict it to BC wines, or is that going to risk it?
Yeah, they could theoretically do that. I think it's probably unlikely, but they could choose to just sell, if they wanted to, only wine from one region, including British Columbia.
Okay, just like a pub can choose to sell certain wines or beers.
Yeah,
or
we
the restaurant
focus
down
on
the street.
Scottish, Scotch, or whatever. It's just, it doesn't happen too often, and I don't know. I don't know what all of the stores' plans are, but I do know specifically that Loblaws is preparing
moving
a rollout
forward for that. Now, I've got to commend you. You, after becoming the Attorney General, Minister responsible for liquor, appointed Mark Hicken to do a liquor policy review, and he did a phenomenal job. Put together all the stakeholders within the industry, whether it be the Wine Institute, Restaurant Association, Pub Association, Private Liquor Store Association, craft breweries, distilleries, and everybody created and came up with, I think it's 23 recommendations or something like that to government to implement. And two of those recommendations are very significant for the industry. One is the ability for the industry to get a licensee discount. So when they purchase their liquor, there'll be a discount that they would, like a wholesale price that they would pay. So hopefully that be passed on to the consumer in a restaurant on the wine list or drink prices. And the second recommendation was licensee sales. So if I'm a licensee, like owning a restaurant, I can go down the street to my local private liquor store and I could buy product for my store. I won't have to go through the LDB system. And I just wonder if you can comment where that process is at and what sort of timelines we have on that development.
Yeah, I imagine most of your listeners are familiar with the process that we introduced. I imagine you have a lot of folks in the industry who listen, and but just in case for those who don't, the idea was we could set out a roadmap for where we spend our energy. Government is, people don't think of it, but government is finite in terms of the number of things it can do. And so what priorities did the industry think we should focus on? And the reason why we did that is because when I was in opposition, I saw a bunch of changes come through that industry wasn't really involved in, to my understanding, the way that they could have been. And some had really unintended consequences. And so the process was really good. The recommendations were really good. The really big pieces are hospitality pricing, licensee to licensee sales, and distribution, I think, are the big three that certainly are front of mind for me in the conversation. I'll start with the last one first. So on distribution, the recommendation was to have a third party come in and do a review of how distribution is done in the province around, especially they're called spec products, but these are sort of less common products, wines, scotches, liqueurs that aren't sold in large quantities, and the LDB does distribute them, but they come from third-party private warehouses like Container World, and they have to go from Container World to the LDB warehouse and then be received, unpacked, and then packaged again into a store package that then is sent to the store, and that caused a huge amount of frustration to the restaurants and the private stores that were ordering these products from the agents, because they had no ability to see once the product left the agent warehouse. They couldn't see where it was. Is it at the distribution center? Has it been unpacked? Has it been packed in the store pallet? When are they going to receive it? It looks like they should be able to receive it. It's not showing up. And it was really hard, is really hard for these folks to do business and to plan their menus and to do all of the things, to plan their stock for their stores and that kind of thing. And for the agents, you sign some product that you're excited about, and you want to get it out on the shelves and get it to consumers, and you can't. So we had a third-party business firm go and do an analysis for us. I've received the report. It's got really good recommendations in it for us to improve the process, and I think that we're going to be able to do some good things on that. We're preparing the report right now for public release. It's got a bunch of confidential business information from some of the private warehouses and from some of the from the LDB and others, and so we want to make sure that it's okay to publicly release it as much as we can so that people can see what's being recommended to us. And I think we're going to be able to make some good improvements on distribution. The last year at this time, I think LDB's fill rate in the new warehouse was in the 70s, 75%, something like that. We're in the high 90s now, which is good. The valley of death of the new warehouse is we're in a much better place now because LDB was operating two warehouses at the same time, and they were hiring and setting up the new warehouse. The fill rate was abysmal, and it's much better now. But still, there's lots of room for improvement, including on delivery times. So that's really exciting. And work has been happening on that. On hospitality pricing, we've brought together many of the same folks around the table on BTAP to talk about hospitality pricing and where we can find shared cost efficiencies to pay for. Essentially, when you're talking about selling a product to a restaurant or to a bar at a lower price, it means that the government is taking in less tax dollars. So that costs money. It means money for schools, hospitals, public services, whatever, and that isn't received because you're reducing the amount of money that government receives. So is there a way that we can find cost efficiencies that people aren't too fussed about and be able to deliver a lower hospitality price? And the good news is I think we may be able to get to that. So that conversation is taking place, and I hope that we're able to get there because government has made a commitment around delivering a hospitality price to industry. I've said many times it's something that I want to do, and that it's a priority for me as minister to deliver that in this mandate of government. And so I'm working closely with industry to get there, and I think we're going to be able to get there, and I have great hope in that process that we're going to be able to get there. So that's exciting, but also the discussions are, we can't talk about them really yet. They're happening. Right. They're happening behind closed doors. It's probably the best way to describe it.
As well as Treasury Board and finance and all that
ultimately, stuff. Anything that is proposed or agreed to has to be approved by my colleagues in Cabinet and Treasury Board. That's right. And then the so we talked about hospitality price, distribution, and licensee to licensee. So one of the things that is critical for licensee to licensee sales is a sufficiently, because currently hospitality has to buy from public stores. They're not allowed to buy from private stores. That's what licensee to licensee sales proposes, is that hospitality could buy, bars and restaurants could buy from anybody, from a public store, from a private store, or whatever. The big gap for all governments, whatever their ideology, has been the fact that if the restaurateur was buying from a private store instead of from the government store, that profit margin on the product, and they pay full retail price, would disappear potentially.
Yeah.
And so that the cost of that is quite significant, and it's very closely tied to the discussion around hospitality price. If hospitality price is lower and closer to wholesale, the more doable licensee to licensee is. We'll have to see how the hospitality price conversation goes, because if it gets right down to wholesale, then there's no financial cost to government in terms of having licensees purchasing from other licensees. And if it's not, if it's somewhere in between, then we're going to have to figure out how much government can afford in terms of the lost revenue.
Yeah, and from a personal perspective, I remember several years ago we were having an event around the Olympics, and it was the Winter Olympics, and we want to serve Moscow mules, which calls for cucumber vodka. So I went to a government liquor store, just thought I could walk in and find cucumber vodka on the shelf. No, and I was told go to a private liquor store down in Vancouver because they knew that they sold cucumber vodka. Yeah. They have it. So if I'm a licensee and I want a particular product, sometimes the government doesn't carry it, and if the government stores don't carry it, then they can order it in, but it takes time. Yes. As opposed to just going down, and sometimes you want to buy just 1 or 2 bottles of something as opposed to a couple of cases. And for me, that would be huge for the industry if we had that ability to be able to do that. But I recognize there are budgetary implications, and I have to walk it through because dollars are tough to find these days in government.
Sure, I mean, and that's the thing about all of these policies we're talking about, short of distribution, is and the reason why people say, oh well, it's because of the union or it's because of this or that. Well, the reality is government revenue. Governments that were for 16 years. I mean, the BC Liberals are not known as particularly friendly to the BC Government Employees Union, and yet they had public distribution and required restaurants to buy from only public stores because they knew the revenue hit was significant. So we're trying to work it out how we might be able to get there, and I feel good about the conversations that are happening. I'm hopeful.
Now, do you see the same challenges on distribution coming on liquor distribution coming up in distribution of cannabis from the cannabis distribution branch to the private stores? Particularly now we've got edibles coming on stream.
Yeah, so we've been fortunately the state of play, as I understand it right now, is that stores are getting the products that they're ordering, that they're getting it in a timely way, that the ramp up has been okay with the stores coming online. At least I haven't been contacted with any complaints, and I certainly was inundated with complaints when the LDB was doing about 75% fills. So I haven't seen that on the cannabis side, which is good news, and I think things have been going well on that side. The concerns that I've heard have more been around the quality of the product that's available and ensuring that it matches the quality of the product that's on the illicit market and also has the benefits of being tested and people know what's in it in terms of pesticides, molds, and everything else. So that's the opportunity for us to have significant improvement. And on edibles, everything's on schedule for that. Following the official legalization date, people have to give Health Canada 60 days notice of their intent to sell an edible product, so it'll be 60 days from the legalization date at a minimum for Health Canada to sign off on the various edible products that'll be stocked. But LDB has done an RFI, and they've got a whole bunch of, I think there are 40 plus producers of these products that have indicated their interest in supplying the LDB. So British Columbians will have a wide variety of products to choose from.
Yeah, and I think edibles will be huge because a lot of people don't want to vape, they don't want to inhale.
Yeah, if you're in rental housing or you're in a condo or something, you don't want your neighbors smelling smoke coming out from under your door, whatever the issue is, right? And so I think it will be a big deal, and it'll be interesting to see how it all rolls out.
Yeah. Now, cannabis infused products being retailed in restaurants. Or the other one that we hear about is cannabis-infused liquor products. Where do you see that going? Or because my understanding is if you had a cannabis-infused liquor product, let's say a beer infused with or a cider infused with cannabis, that, well, first of all, where are you going to sell it? You can't sell it in a liquor store because it's got cannabis in it. You can't sell it in a cannabis store because it's got liquor in it. Where do you see that field going or not going, or is that on your radar screen yet?
Yeah, I don't think the feds allow cannabis liquor products at all in Canada currently, but I understand why. I mean, there have been big problems with caffeine, alcohol drinks, and so everyone gets a little leery with people mixing drugs even before the consumer takes them. And so I understand the concern. What's interesting and where the sort of next phases, I think, of legalization are things like cooking with cannabis, cannabis restaurants you were describing, and bakeries and that kind of thing, and then also sort of tasting events like you would have with liquor or with wine or beer, and those aren't currently permitted, and so you can see, I mean, the easiest path to see in terms of where the federal government is going, assuming a continuation of the policy, is to look at the liquor sphere, and certainly from our perspective, that's the best place to look, because our conversations with the feds about, as I said, farm gate sales and small growers and so on, are really based on the experience in the alcohol side of the industry.
Yeah, we've been doing quite a bit of work with licensees who hold liquor licenses to recognize the obvious situation where a patron could be consuming cannabis outside the establishment and they come in, or they're in the establishment, they go out and smoke and then come back in and they're carrying on drinking a beer. Or the one scenario we have is on a golf course playing surface, it's licensed, so people can have a beer while they're playing golf, but they've also can, because it's outdoors, they can also reach into the golf bag, pull out a cannabis and smoke it, eventually an edible. And then, so what do you got at the end of that with the person, and watching for signs of impairment, watching for signs of intoxication? Has there been any uptick in terms of roadside checks or police stops or anything like that that you're aware of, in terms of now that cannabis has been around for a year?
So police have increased their number of drug recognition trained police as a formal training program that they go through to recognize signs of intoxication in people who are using vehicles. And the reason why they've been doing that is there's still only one instrument that's licensed for use in Canada by the federal government for detecting whether or not a person is impaired by cannabis. Some police forces haven't ordered that machine because of concerns about how it works and whether it's sufficiently accurate and whether it's sufficiently reliable. The Solicitor General has said that he's very hopeful in his conversation with the feds that there'll be new technology approved by them for detecting cannabis impairment. But right now it is really difficult that there's not a breathalyzer-like device that can adequately determine whether someone in the moment is impaired by cannabis or not. And I think that that challenge of identifying that is a serious one, and why the police are needing extra training to be able to identify it.
Well, listen, I've got to wrap this up, because you've been very generous with your time this afternoon, and very much appreciate you being on our License to Chill show. And keep up the good work, and I hope you'll come back.
Thanks for your interest. Yeah, I hope so too.
Thanks a lot.
Bye-bye.
You've been listening to License to Chill with your host, Bert Hick. This podcast is recorded live at Studio 710 in downtown Vancouver and produced by Jade Maple. For more information, check out risingtideconsultants.ca.